Hi, this is Jonathan from Clever Tiny Homes. Earlier this year, we were invited by the organizers of TinyFest to give a talk on the 10 tips for designing and building quality tiny homes. I gave this talk at TinyFest Southern California, the Del Mar Fairgrounds outside of San Diego, and we got a recording of it. The recording's not great quality, but we think you'll enjoy it. Here it is.
Fill out that form if you want to stay in contact with Dan. We want to thank Umbrella Media for sponsoring the main stage today. And now I know you have a lot of questions about designing and building a tiny home. And friends, I will tell you, there is a difference between being a good builder and being a good tiny home builder. That is a whole different thing once you throw tiny homes into the mix. So we have somebody here who's very, very qualified to tell us about tiny home building and design. His name is Jonathan Pally. He is the builder of the beautiful tiny home back there with Clever Tiny Homes, and he is going to tell us all about designing and building for this new type of small space living. Please welcome Jonathan Pally.
Woo! All right, thank you. I'm going to try to speak loud that everyone can hear. It's a little bit too loud. Fortunately, the microphone system isn't great. Is that good? Is that tuned well? Okay. Just holler if I'm getting too quiet or loud here. I know it's a little hard to hear. Yeah, thank you for TinyFest for inviting us to speak here on the stage about designing and building quality tiny homes. It's something we're passionate about, and we spend a lot of time researching, thinking, iterating on, testing, and I want to share a lot of those learnings with you in this presentation. There's a few people out there. Maybe I can just ask first, who's looking at building your own tiny home? Here, awesome. And then who's just looking at eventually buying one and kind of evaluating which one to buy? Cool, wow, 50-50, 50-50 mix. All right, I've got the talk is titled 10 Design and Construction Tips for Designing Tiny Homes. We've got 5 design tips and 5 building science or engineering tips, and I'm going to intermix them as we go here. So if you care about the design stuff, there's some of that. If you care about building science and engineering, we've got some of that. Feel free to interrupt, just raise your hand if you've got any questions. This is much more fun if it's interactive and when we all just talk together. Does that work? Now, first of all, this is not about Clever Tiny Homes, but it might be worthwhile. Let me just give you a quick background of why are we talking about this and who we are. And the core idea behind Clever Tiny Homes, my company, is to build really high quality tiny homes that cost less. And we do that through automation, we do that through assembly line production and efficient sourcing, and we do that through a lot of research and development. So before we built our first home, we spent over a year researching, testing, iterating on how to design and build a good quality tiny home. We don't do custom builds, we just do mass production, but that really gives us the space to invest heavily in what I'm going to talk about here. So that's the first thing about kind of where we're coming from as Clever Tiny Homes. The second thing is a little bit of our background. We've got a 100-person team that builds these, but in particularly, half of what I'm talking about here really comes from Dee Dee, who's filming there, who prefers not to be on stage and just behind the stage. But Dee Dee, before moving to the US, ran one of the largest architecture and design firms in Asia. She designed the Beijing Olympic Convention Center. She designed the Venetian Casino Macau, which is the largest hotel in the world, and a lot of big buildings. But also, having worked primarily in the big cities of Asia, you know, if you've been there, 400 square feet is not a tiny home. It's just a home. And so she's built literally thousands and thousands and thousands of designs of what here we consider tiny homes. So there's a lot of learning there that we've taken in terms of how you design a small space that feels really great. So that's really quickly kind of our background. Let's get into it. So tip number 1 here is to balance efficiency, and it's a design tip, balance efficiency with pleasure. One thing we've seen a lot that I disagree with is there's a tendency when building a tiny home to try to cram everything in. I'm going to build a full house and just make it all smaller. But that doesn't necessarily match how you actually live in the space. And you want to think about, what do I want to be full size? What are the spaces I spend my time in that if it's crammed, I'm actually going to not have the pleasure of living in that space and thinking very thoughtfully about where do you want that kind of bigger spaces and where do you want smaller. It's not about making everything smaller. It's about creating joy out of the spaces. So for example, in our designs, everyone who's living this is going to use the bathroom. And I'm not a very big person, but I find small showers not comfortable. It's just not joyful. You're going to relax in that. And so we put full size, shower baths in our designs because our feeling was, yeah, it's a tiny home, but that's a space that no matter what you're doing at home, you're going to use. Let's make that a space that brings joy every time you take that shower. Not everyone cares about that, but that's an example of think about where you want to have full size spaces versus kind of shrinking stuff down. So that's a design point. Engineering. We're going to switch between design and engineering this talk. All right, let's talk about plumbing, and particularly fully roughed-in plumbing. Now, I'm going to start by saying some of the engineering things I'm saying here are going to be controversial, and there's many builders who will disagree with this. So I'm just going to give you the data. I'm going to give you what we think. You can make your own decisions as to whether this matters or not for you. Let me say that up front. So not everyone's going to agree. But in our viewpoint, the plumbing should be fully roughed in, which means it should be inside the building envelope. I always look at a home, a mobile home, or any home on wheels, the first thing I do is look underneath. And you look underneath and it'll tell you a lot about the quality of the construction. Are the pipes hanging out? Is it well sealed underneath? ABS and PVC pipe are not supposed to be exposed to the sun. A lot of people do, but they will degrade much faster if they're outside. Animals, all these kind of things will get in there. And from an engineering perspective, it's very hard to seal pipe protrusions. So when you have those pipes kind of hanging out, it's very hard to seal the home. It's very hard to do it. So I always look underneath. Again, not everyone's going to agree with this, but look underneath and see if it's fully roughed in. So on the left is how we do our homes. And you can see there's the bottom of the home. This is a top-down view that fully seals the bottom, and the plumbing's inside, if that makes sense. So fully roughed-in plumbing we think is important on the engineering side. Going back to design, multifunctional spaces. There's two ways to make something tiny. One, you can shrink things down, or two, you can think about how the floor area you have can be used in multiple different ways. For example, in our smaller model, we really like Murphy beds. Murphy beds, we like them because you've got a full bed or a queen size bed. You can have a nice big bed at night, and then if you want that extra space for a party, you fold it up, and now you've used that space in two different ways, right? Square footage is the kind of limiting factor in a tiny home. You've got a limited number of square footage. How can you make that square footage count? And so we like to think about how can that space become multifunctional in different ways. Okay, switching to engineering. Thermal break. This is another key pet peeve of mine. Not everyone is going to agree with this, but there's a lot of data behind this. Tiny homes on wheels are built on trailers. One common cost-saving thing that you can do is use the frame of the trailer to put the subfloor, it's not the subfloor, the floor right on the frame of the trailer. Does that make sense? Right? So you have a trailer frame, you put the floor right on this, and it makes sense from one perspective. You're using that metal twice for both the trailer and to frame up the floor. Unfortunately, it's very, very bad from a thermal perspective, from an insulation perspective. And so I've seen homes, like on the right, where they'll put the floor right on the trailer frame, and then they'll put insulation between all those metal things. As someone who's trained in physics, it a little bit drives me crazy, and I'm going to be honest, because it's not how thermodynamics work. If you do the calculation, if you put R30 insulation between those metal things, but put your fluoride on it, your effective insulation value is less than R2. In other words, you just wasted all that insulation. So we think it's really, really important because you have this big piece of metal which conducts heat for a quality build to make sure you have what's called in building science a thermal break. In other words, everywhere in your inside has insulation between the inside and the outside. And in this case, the trailer frame. And there's a lot of different ways to do that. You can frame the subfloor above the trailer, like I'm showing in that picture on the left. You can use foam insulation to then fill in that gap. We're happy to talk about that. There's a lot of ways, but the key idea is that nowhere on the interior do you have a floor or a wall that's directly touching that metal of the trailer, because metal is a great conductor of heat. And in buildings, we don't want to conduct heat. We want to stop heat or cold from going in and out. So thermal breaks, we think, are an important part of a quality build. Any questions so far? I'll repeat the question. Yeah. The question is, do you lose a few inches of height by doing that thermal break there? You know, with foam insulation, we lose like 2 inches, but that's nothing. But you get enough. You know, the difference between 2 inches of foam insulation, which is like R11, and being right on metal, when you do the calculations, is night and day, right? And so not a lot of foam with very big distance. The other thing, of course, is how you do the above deck or below deck, right? So if you drop your subfloor into the trailer and then have the insulation there, you can still be quite low. Versus if you do above the wheels completely, that's different. Yeah. All right, jump in with any other questions. Any other questions at this point? All right, keep going. We're on 3 of 7 here. So that's engineering thermal breaks. Back to design. Simplify the interior. This is really from Dini. You don't have a lot of space. And what does that mean? Well, in a 3,000 square foot house, when you're standing in a room, all you're really seeing is that room. If you're in the kitchen, you're seeing the kitchen. If you're in a bedroom, you're basically seeing the bedroom. What's in your eyesight is less. In a tiny home, you stand on one end of it, and you're likely seeing the entire home. So from a design aesthetic perspective, if it's really, really busy, it's gonna feel smaller, and it's gonna feel less comfortable. So you really want to think about how you use materials and kind of designs that simplify it, so that view as you're looking and you're seeing all these things in the home doesn't feel so crowded, doesn't feel so busy. It feels a lot more peaceful when you're in it. Because, and again, this is the difference between tiny homes and big homes, is anywhere you stand, you're going to see a lot more of the functionality of the home. And so you want to simplify from a design perspective. So simplify the interior. Okay, engineering. This is a key one. If there's anything you take away from the talk, let it be this. Wall water management. Water is the enemy of buildings. You've probably heard that. Any new builder knows it. Okay, tiny homes have an extra challenge. If you look at all the homes out here and you look at the roof, there's something that basically none of them have, and that's an eave, right? A standard home, here's your wall, that roof is gonna extend 18, maybe more inches past that wall. That is, in a traditional home, your number one protection from water. It's the umbrella. The umbrella is a good analogy, right? You're out in the rain, what do? You put on an umbrella. That umbrella gives you primarily, you might still have a rain jacket on, but an umbrella is stopping most of that rain from hitting you. For houses built on wheels that we're transporting, we don't want to waste that space on eaves. We want to give that space to the interior. So we tend not to put big eaves. That's okay, but it means that your wall is going to have a lot more rain than a traditional house, even in a low rain place like California or like San Diego, right? That wall now becomes like a roof. So water ingress is a big problem in tiny homes, and you've got to design for that. So how do we engineer to make more robust walls? Well, it ends up there's a part of the country that gets a lot of rain, and they do a lot of work and a lot of building codes around how to build really good walls, and that's the Pacific Northwest, Seattle area. If you build a wall in Seattle, there's very different ways you build it than in San Diego. But our viewpoint is any tiny home, because you have a lot more rain on that wall, should be built to that code. And there's a couple of key things. First of all, window flashing. Windows should be flashed. As you go and look at a home that you're buying here and building your own home, look at the windows and see if there's flashing on the windows. Window flashing basically makes sure that water that's coming down the wall gets pushed away from the windows. And the reason that's important is because windows are where water gets into houses. And there's a lot of good ways to seal windows, and hopefully builders do that, tape them up and everything like that. But flashing is the next level. That's code in most of the country, but it's not code in tiny homes. But it's very, very important. So you want to get window flash on. It doesn't cost much. It's very cheap. Put window flashing on. So that's level 1. Level 2 that we do is what's called a rain screen. And a rain screen is code in Seattle. It's not here. A rain screen is a gap between your waterproof barrier and your siding. I'll explain that. So if you look at a traditional house stack up, you have your sheathing, which is your main structural, exterior structure thing. You have a waterproof barrier, which prevents water from getting in. And then in Southern California, how we usually build is we then put the siding right on the sheathing. A rain screen is a gap you put between the siding and the sheathing. And the reason you do that is so that if water penetrates the siding, which is your first layer of defense, it just drains out. It doesn't get stuck between the siding and the sheathing. And so it basically gives you an extra layer of protection against water and water ingress. Now any water that penetrates the siding is just gonna drain out. There's a lot of ways to do rain screens. You can check them out in our house. The way we do it is we do furring strips along the studs, and then there's a mesh material that's sold for rain screens that you put on the bottom so that bugs can't crawl up into it. And that's how you do rain screens. If you're curious, you can check out our house. You can actually feel underneath and feel the rain screen. But rain screens are really what takes water protection to the next level, and it's what's going to make a tiny house that's getting pounded by water on that wall last for decades. And that's really our goal, right? Tiny houses, the goal is that these are houses that they're small, they're affordable, but they last a long time, right? They're quality. That's the goal. Any questions on that? All right, water ingress, key thing. Look for the flashing. Design. We're going back to design. And this relates to the last tip, which was on Simplified. And we call it prioritize materials over decoration. And I'll use an example, right? When you're designing a house and building a house, there's probably an aesthetic you're going for. You're going for mid-century modern. You're going for cabin look. There's all kinds of different valid design choices and styles to go after. And there's different ways to hint at that style, right? You can get different doorknobs that suggest that, right? Different cabinet things, different materials. The thing to think about in a tiny home is decoration. So things like doorknob or like cabinet handles, right? Here's the difference between a tiny home and a regular home. That cabinet handle that you put on that speaks to that style, it's taking up 1.5 inches. And it's taking up 1.5 inches along the entire length of your cabinets, and you don't have a lot of floor space, right? So when you're designing a tiny home, what we like to do is think about how do we speak to the style with the materials and really minimize the amount of extra decorations like cabinet handles and things like this. Because those take up space, they make it feel busy, whereas you can use materials to tell the same design story that you're trying to go after from a design perspective. So we like to think about, use materials over decorations because it saves space and it makes it less busy. All right, back to air sealing. So this is another one. Not everyone's going to agree with this, but we feel it's important. And this is really, honestly, how you build a quality home in 2024 more than anything. We used to build homes that breathe, if anyone's seen that. That's no longer the latest building science. Now it's about how do you build a home that's tight, meaning that it has very good air sealing around it. Why is that? It goes to energy efficiency. We all know, probably most people know R value of walls. That's only a portion of the equation in terms of the energy efficiency of your house. And the way to think about this, if you have the greatest R value in your wall, but you leave a window open, it doesn't matter. But most homes are built so that they leak. that through between the floor and your sill plate, if you don't seal that, water's going to seep in, right? Same with the roof, between the decking of the roof. There's all kinds of places that air can come into a house. And if you look at most houses built earlier, not just tiny houses, they have a lot of air that seeps into the house. And that leads to a lack of efficiency because you're bringing in that cold air or hot air, right? We have the technology now in the 20th century to build homes that are tight. And how you do that is you seal everything. You make sure, whether it's through taping, which we do a lot, or glue or things like this, that that interior envelope of your home is completely sealed from the outside such that air can't go in and out unless you want it to. Does that kind of make sense? And that dramatically increases the R value of your home. It also increases the comfort. It's quieter, it lasts longer because bugs aren't, if air can't get in, guess what else can't get in? Bugs can't get in, right? Termites can't get in. All these other things can't get in if it's air sealed. So, you know, we really think about how we air seal our home, make it airtight, and that increases the robustness of it. Any questions at this point? No, yes. The question was, what do you use to seal the roof? We do what's called monopoly framing. There's some videos on this. Basically, you have the sheathing and your waterproof barrier, and then the roof, the decking goes right around. So it's cut flush with the sheathing, and then we just tape. We put an ice and water shield on the roof, and then just tape the between the roof and the sheathing. That's a great question. And what he's getting at, for those of you who aren't builders, is a lot of the traditional way of building is you'll have that eave going out, right, over, and you'll have a vented attic, basically. And so then you've got all these problems of how do you seal the attic from the rest of the roof. So what we do here, and you can do this with eaves too, is that you basically have, this is the roof, and here's your wall. You build the roof decking right to the wall and then tape around it. And if you want to add eaves, you then add those as an addition, basically, instead of as part of the vented thing. So that way, again, that envelope is fully sealed. And this is just butyl tape. Anyone who's been in construction knows, you know, it's butyl tape. It's what you should tape windows with or stuff like that we use. Yeah. And it was a great question. Any other questions? Yeah.
What do you use to exchange the air in the house when it's so tight?
That's my next slide. All right, the question was, how do you exchange the air? Actually, I'll just jump there. So if you seal your house, you've got to bring fresh air in, right? And this is really the technology change that now exists. We now have some things called energy recovery ventilators or heat recovery ventilators. And what these are fresh air systems that are energy efficient. And so they have two fans in it. One blows fresh air in, and the other blows stale air out, so that you're getting a constant new fresh air, but it blows it past what's called a heat exchanger. And those heat exchangers are 95 to 98% efficient in exchanging the temperature of the air you're blowing out with the air that's coming in. So what's really cool about these is you can get fresh air in your home, but you don't lose the air conditioning or the heat that you've pumped into the home. And this is really what enables, you know, modern buildings to be built this way, building scientists. I will say, if you look at ERVs, just so everyone knows, most of these are going in multi-million-dollar houses. They're big, huge things that cost thousands of dollars. We work directly with a manufacturer to bring a tiny home one size in certified for the US that we put in our homes. If you're interested in buying that directly from us, I mean, I don't publish this publicly, but you can talk to us. If you go into our homes, we've the first ones in North America with small, tiny home size ERVs that allow us to do this kind of fresh air exchange, but not have a big, huge system that's spec'd out for that. The systems we use, what's really nice, is it also has a CO2 monitor, right? So if you've ever been at home, you know, there's something that's like, CO2 is a key part of comfort. If you're in a bedroom and you wake up tired and you've got all your windows sealed, it's likely because your CO2 levels rise overnight, and it makes you feel more tired, right? And so we put a CO2 sensor in so that and it runs it basically to make sure that CO2 level stays, at a healthy level throughout the day. It's not expensive to do, and it dramatically changed the livability of the house.
Also a heat pump?
Question is that also a heat pump? No, it's not a heat pump. It's an air exchanger and a heat exchanger. A heat pump works on a similar principle in terms of transferring heat from one location to another. A heat pump for a lot of us is like what most mini splits are. If you've seen those for heating and cooling, they're very energy efficient ways to heat and cool. The way a heat pump works is, as opposed to having one unit where air is going in and out, you have a unit inside and a unit outside. That's your split. And then you usually use a gas that you run between the two, and it brings the cool from inside or outside and exchanges it. And that's how a heat pump works. And we put those in as the mini split units in our unit. And again, honestly, whether you're building a tiny home or a big home, mini splits have progressed so much. They're so energy efficient. They're so magical. You can just pop them on and it heats. I highly encourage you to build whatever size home with mini splits because they're great. If you've ever used one, they work really well. Yeah, it's a great question. Any other questions on this? This is pretty much my whole presentation, yeah. So there's two types. There's an HRV and ERV, and one does and one doesn't. Yeah, so it kind of depends where you are. Yeah, it's a great question. Yes? The question was maintenance of ERV. Hey, you're putting this new mechanical thing in the home, is it going to break down, right? Which is a great question. The nice thing about ERVs is unlike a mini split or a heating system or all that kind of, they're actually physically very, very simple. It's two fans, and then the heat exchanger. But the heat exchanger is a material. It's a metal material, so that doesn't go bad. So they last a really long time because they're two very low-speed fans. It's not like your traditional HVAC system where you got this big fan with a huge motor that's trying to blow a lot of air in. You don't need a big fan. So they're these little brushless fans, that are rated for 20 years that just gently blow. Because you're not trying to bring tons of air in. It's just enough to keep that CO2 level fresh, right? And there's no other mechanical components in them other than the heating, other than the two little motors. Yeah, that's a great question. So I think our last slide here is we like to think a lot design for multi-sensory experiences. And this gets to what we were talking about with air exchange and stuff like this. It's a house. We live in a house. We're multi-sensory beings, as it were. I think we think a lot as designers. We think visually. But we're not just, in living in a house, it's not just about what you see. It's what you hear. How well do you, seal it? That air sealing doesn't just impact the efficiency, it also makes it quieter, right? And for a lot of us, that's nice, being able to sleep and have a truck go by and not hear it. So we like to think that, design is not just visual. Design is auditory. Design smells, right? Ventilation is an important part of smell, but how is it going to feel when you open a window, right? How's it going to feel when you put flowers up, when you cook? What does that feel like? That's another part of that kind of multi-sensory idea. So design for multi-sensory. Those are the slides. I've got one more bonus engineering thing. So I've got a minute here. That is also a pet peeve of mine. Not everyone agrees with this, but I want to put out there as food for thought. And that is to use electric appliances inside the tiny home instead of gas. I am not a doctor. However, I used to run a medical device company in the respiratory space. I saw a lot of people's lungs get very messed up. And gas stoves and gas appliances emit, chemicals that aren't great for our lungs. In a big house, it's fine. Maybe it's not fine, but it dissipates. If you got 3,000 feet, it's going to float away. If you're in 220 square feet, it's going to go right into your lungs. And it's not great from a health perspective. So we really encourage, using electrical appliances. Induction cooktops are magical. You've never used them, they're magical. And so, really think if you're, a lot of people like gas, I know that, but before you decide to put gas in your home, try an induction cooktop, just see what it's like. And see what it's like, because it is, in a small space, things go wrong a lot faster from a health perspective and a safety perspective. And gas, things can go wrong. So that's the difference between a big house and a tiny house. Yeah. The question was, is there anything proprietary about our windows? And then there was another question, which is, do we do battery storage? So I answered the first one. No, there's nothing proprietary about our windows. Definitely use good double pane windows, right? In California, there's something called Title 24, which is the Energy Building Code. A tiny house on wheels doesn't need to meet that building code. It's nice if it does, obviously, but there's what are called Title 24 windows, which are better, are windows that have been rated to have a good heat factor insulation. Those are widely available. They don't cost that much. So definitely use that. Obviously, and this is just a basic builder tip, if you're building a tiny house on wheels, your windows should be tempered glass. Because if you're driving it down the road and a little rock hits, you're going to be happy if that's a tempered glass window and not a normal glass. So when you buy windows, for those of you who are building your own homes, specify tempered glass windows for sure. The other question was battery storage. So yeah, Clever Tiny Homes, this is not necessarily talk about us, but we do have off-grid options where we do inverters and batteries and solar panels and generator backups and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. One of the questions from an engineering perspective is, do you wire it like a house or do you wire it like an RV, right? Our preference is to wire it like a house because it is a house, and then you can hook it up to the grid if you want to and do all that kind of stuff. But yeah. Any other questions? Yes. So we have a question over here, and I happen to know that you're a doctor as well that does amazing work among, there's a lot of communities, not just unhoused folks, but low-income mothers with children, fathers with children that need quality housing that's affordable, quality, and also healthy to live in. And you asked a question about communities. That's something that we're passionate about. In fact, there's a gentleman here who's an expert in developing communities, tiny home communities that we're working with. And yeah, it's something we hope to do a lot more with. Their tiny homes really give that opportunity to create communities with shared space. And the nice thing is, you can get a number of nice homes on a relatively small area of land and still have green space. A lot of the traditional knock on RV parks is that you boom, 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 or trailer parks, and you don't have that green space. We have a design over there. There's a beautiful community getting built in Arizona called Gather Tiny Homes. Check out the design we have over there. There's, it is high density for sure, but there's also green. And I think that's really, really important, really beautiful. But great question. Any other questions? I can talk, honestly, anything about building a tiny home. You have questions? I've got a few more minutes here. So this was a kind of other question, more Clever Tiny Home specific, but I'll answer it generally for everyone. The question was, are we planning to modular? The answer is yes. In fact, very, very soon. So our company builds currently park model RVs, which is how they're certified. There's been some talks here on different certifications, the way that tiny homes can be certified. Most of what you see out here on wheels are certified as a park model RV or a tiny house on wheels. But you can't, they're not real property. So a lot of jurisdictions, Dan was just talking about how they're not allowed everywhere. You have to put them on a foundation. That is, in the building world, it's called modular construction. At Clever Tiny Homes, we're about to release exactly our same designs, but modular certified. It's a different certification process. And maybe the bigger question here that's not just related to us is a lot of people ask, hey, my city requires it to be on foundation. Can I take a park model RV and attach it to a foundation? Technically, you can. Legally, you cannot, because it's a different certification process. During the construction, it has to be certified as modular. We're doing that in California and Arizona. If you talk to us afterwards about that. Yeah, I can talk about any aspects of building tiny homes. I've got like a few more minutes here. I'm trying to be brief. Well, thank you so much. Hopefully this is helpful. Hopefully there was something helpful here. And yeah, enjoy the rest of the show.
Right, thank you so much. That was Jonathan of Clever Tiny Homes. Make sure you stop by, tour his beautiful houses. Catch him on the way out, ask him your follow-up questions. Make sure you stay in touch.